The air on Avalon Station was thick with tension as David Carter sat in the council chamber, his fingers lightly tapping the cold surface of the table. As the humans took their seats, the galaxy's representatives, each from a different world, with different customs and languages, shifted uncomfortably. There was always an unspoken friction when humans were involved. The Deathworlders, as many called them, had earned that title for their ferocity, resilience, and unpredictability. But there was another, lesser-known part of the human reputation: their self-appointed role as the galaxy's moral compass, the guardians of weaker species who had long been exploited by the more civilized powers. It was an image humanity had cultivated carefully for decades, earning grudging respect from species like the peaceful Tikar and the prosperous Jorin. But today, everything was about to change. The Tikar ambassador, a towering reptilian figure named Kirk, rose from his seat with a predatory grace, his eyes narrowing as he addressed the assembly. It is clear that Earth's resources are vast, untapped, and underutilized. We propose a new treaty, one that will allow the taker free access to those resources in exchange for technology and defense provisions for the Earth colonies. His voice was smooth, diplomatic, but his tone carried an edge that hinted at entitlement. David's gaze hardened. For years, humans had sat at this table, listening to such proposals, offering what little they could without ever asking for anything in return. But now, after all the sacrifices, the endless negotiations, the compromises, it had gone too far. The room fell silent, the moment stretching on as David stood. His jaw tightened. "You speak of resources as if they are yours for the taking, Kirk. You speak of my people as if our worlds are yours to exploit." He paused, looking around the room at the sea of alien faces, some curious, some condescending, some already planning their next move. "This ends now." Without another word, he turned and left the chamber, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. The human delegation's exit was deliberate. Humanity had crossed a line. For the first time in centuries, the Deathworlders had stopped being the galaxy's caretakers. Back on Earth, the decision to withdraw from galactic diplomacy reverberated like an earthquake across the known universe. News feeds flashed across the holoscreens of alien cities, recounting David Carter's defiant exit from the council chamber, his sharp words hanging in the air like a challenge. Humanity was no longer the galaxy's safety net. The entire diplomatic infrastructure that had been built over decades seemed to shudder as Earth's withdrawal signaled the end of an era. President Jenna Hayes addressed the United Nations just hours after the announcement. Her face, lit by the cold, efficient glow of 1,000 media feeds, was calm but resolute. "Humanity will no longer act as the moral watchdog of this galaxy," she began, her voice steady. "For too long, we've been the enforcers of peace, sacrificing our people and resources to maintain an order that is not ours to keep. The galaxy has been taking advantage of our kindness, and this ends today." In a few short sentences, President Hayes dismantled centuries of diplomacy and goodwill, a move that sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. She followed the declaration with a grim announcement. Earth would no longer participate in the Intergalactic Council. No more trade. No more alliances. Humanity, it seemed, was severing ties with the stars. Back in space, the effects were felt almost immediately. The Zorin Trade Guild, which had relied heavily on Earth's resources and logistical expertise, felt the first tremors. Cargo vessels that once ferried supplies between Earth and the far-flung colonies now sat idle in their docks. The Jorin stock markets plummeted as trade routes that had been active for centuries went silent. For species like the peaceful Tikar, the announcement was a shock. They had never considered the possibility that the humans might simply walk away. The idea of losing their protection and support was unthinkable. Without Earth's influence, the delicate web of diplomacy that had held the galaxy together seemed to be unraveling. And yet, none of the galaxy's powers truly grasped the consequences. Humanity's withdrawal was not an empty gesture. It was a warning. The galaxy's power structures were beginning to crack. In the days following Earth's announcement, something unexpected began to unfold: rebellions. At first, they were small, isolated, and easily dismissed by the galactic elites. But as the months passed, the uprisings grew in frequency and intensity. The rebellion was not being led by the mighty, the wealthy, or the powerful. It was being sparked by the oppressed, the forgotten races who had long lived under the boot of the galaxy's civilized powers. The Sci-Fi, a species once ruthlessly exploited by the Vorcan Empire for their mineral-rich homeworlds, were the first to act. With Earth's withdrawal, the Vorcan Empire's grip on the Sci-Fi loosened. The Sci-Fi had been quietly biding their time, absorbing human strategies in warfare and learning the tricks of survival. The moment the Vorcan Empire's supply chains began to falter, the Sci-Fi struck. Small, guerrilla-style attacks erupted across the Vorcan mining colonies. The Sci-Fi hit and ran, taking supplies and disabling key infrastructure. Vorcan patrols were ambushed in the dark of the night. Vorcan military convoys were ambushed and sabotaged. In the past, the Sci-Fi would have been crushed for such defiance. But with the Vorcans distracted by humanity's sudden withdrawal and the loss of support from Earth, the Sci-Fi were emboldened. And they were not alone. The Novans, a peaceful species once enslaved by the Taker, followed suit. Their homeworld, once a fertile paradise, had been turned into a resource extraction site for the reptilian race. But now, with Earth stepping away from its role as the galaxy's protector, the Novans took up arms. They knew they could never hope to defeat the Taker directly, but they could cripple their economic base. The Novan resistance began to sabotage the Taker's mining operations on several worlds, hitting strategic supply lines that the Taker had assumed were safe. Across the galaxy, smaller species like the Ithrians, the Talon, and even the aquatic Kelzar began to rise up, emboldened by the actions of humanity's defiance. No longer did they fear retribution from the so-called civilized races. The galaxy's mighty empires, once thought to be unassailable, were suddenly showing cracks. Humanity had withdrawn, yes, but the chaos that followed their departure was something far worse than anyone had predicted. A galaxy on the brink of total upheaval. The ripple effects of Earth's withdrawal were spreading faster than even the most pessimistic analysts had predicted. As the smaller, once subjugated races began to rise up, the established powers were forced to confront a reality they had long ignored. Their dominance was no longer guaranteed. The Taker, once the galaxy's dominant economic and military force, found themselves stretched thin as multiple insurgencies erupted on worlds they considered their own. The Joran, still reeling from the loss of trade routes and their dependence on Earth's logistical systems, started to quietly regroup. The economic fallout from Earth's withdrawal had exposed their own vulnerabilities, and they knew they had to act quickly to stabilize their position. But it wasn't just their own problems that consumed them, it was the growing resistance. In an unexpected move, the Joran initiated clandestine talks with the Sci-Fi and the Novans, two races they had long viewed with disdain. Both had long been oppressed by the Taker and Vorcan empires, but now they were fighting back. The Joran, eager to protect their interests, secretly offered support to the insurgents, providing them with weapons and resources in exchange for future trade agreements that would bypass the Taker's stranglehold on the region. The Sci-Fi, no strangers to survival, saw an opportunity to strike back against their former oppressors. With human influence no longer available, they understood that alliances were their best chance for success. In a daring move, they accepted the Joran's offer, forming a precarious alliance of convenience. The Novans, equally pragmatic, also agreed to the terms, setting aside their historical animosities for a common cause: survival. This new coalition, an unlikely mix of races who had once been enemies or pawns, began to take shape, setting the stage for a shift in the galaxy's balance of power. But the Taker, sensing the threat to their dominance, began to plot a response. Their response would be swift and decisive, yet they underestimated one critical factor. They were no longer facing just an uprising of the oppressed. They were facing a galaxy-wide revolution, with Earth's withdrawal acting as the spark. As the first meetings of the new coalition took place in the shadows of Avalon Station, a silent message echoed across the stars. The old order was over, and the galaxy was about to change forever. The decision had been made. The old ways were no longer viable. Humanity would no longer be the galaxy's protectors, nor would they play the role of pacifists, sacrificing their future for a peace that had never truly existed. Earth's retreat from galactic affairs was not simply an abandonment, it was a declaration of self-interest, and it set the stage for a brutal new chapter in the galaxy's history. The first blood spilled not on Earth's soil, but on the Vorcan homeworld. In the wake of humanity's withdrawal, the Vorcan Empire, humiliated and desperate to reassert its power, had made the fatal mistake of directly threatening Earth's colonies. The Vorcans sent a fleet, a massive armada of dreadnoughts and warships, toward the human frontier, intent on quashing what they saw as an insolent, disobedient species. They had underestimated the Deathworlders. The Valor, a human flagship, emerged from the darkness of space just beyond the asteroid belt that separated Earth from its colonies. It was a formidable warship, capable of leveling entire fleets with its advanced weaponry. But it was not its size or firepower that made the Valor so terrifying. It was the strategy behind it. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for decades. Commander Elizabeth Hale, a rising star in Earth's military, stood at the helm of the Valor, her eyes fixed on the Vorcan fleet as it advanced. She knew what had to be done. As the Vorcan ships entered firing range, the Valor struck first, unleashing a barrage of electromagnetic pulses that knocked out the Vorcan ships' communication systems and targeting sensors. The Vorcan fleet faltered, their coordination lost in an instant. But that was only the beginning. The Valor's strike was only a diversion. A smaller, faster fleet of human vessels, decoys designed to mislead and misdirect, suddenly appeared, flanking the Vorcan armada from behind. The Vorcans, already caught off guard, were now facing multiple threats from all sides. Within hours, their entire fleet was crippled. The Vorcan flagship, Inferno's Wrath, was left drifting in space, its shields failing, its weapons disabled. Commander Hale's voice crackled through the comms, cold and final. This is what happens when you misjudge the Deathworlders. The galaxy was watching, and it would never be the same. Humanity's message was clear. When provoked, they would fight with a ferocity and cunning that no one could predict. The first blood had been spilled, and the taste was sweet. The victory over the Vorcan Empire had sent shockwaves through the galaxy, but it was only the beginning. In the wake of Earth's brutal efficiency, the galaxy's dominant powers were faced with an uncomfortable truth. They could no longer expect humanity to be the galaxy's moral compass, nor could they afford to ignore the rising tide of rebellion among the oppressed species. What had started as an isolated incident had now escalated into a full-scale war, a war in which Earth was no longer the passive bystander, but the central player. The Taker, who had long seen themselves as the galaxy's true rulers, were the next to feel the wrath of humanity's newfound resolve. The reptilian species had been biding their time, quietly bolstering their defences and fortifying their borders. They had assumed that the Vorcan's defeat would be a temporary setback, that their own plans for expansion would continue unchallenged. They were wrong. Humanity's message was clear. The galaxy was no longer theirs to exploit. The Taker, facing insurrections in their own colonies, as well as mounting threats from the Joran and Sithari coalitions, found themselves cornered. It was not just the smaller species rising up. Now, humanity itself was on the offensive. In an unprecedented move, Taker High Commander Psarlan issued an ultimatum. Earth must return to its position as the peacekeeper of the galaxy, or face total annihilation. Their forces mobilized, preparing to launch a crippling strike against the human homeworld, to force Earth back into the fold, where it had always belonged in their eyes. But the Taker had underestimated the resilience of the Deathworlders. Human forces, now united in purpose with their new allies, were ready. A fleet of over 100 human warships, augmented by Scythari and Joran fighters, assembled at the edge of Taker space. Earth's forces were no longer just defending their colonies, they were striking back hard, and with a determination that had not been seen in the galaxy for centuries. Commander Hale, once again leading the charge, gave the order to engage. "Today," she said, her voice cutting through the comms with icy resolve, "we end this." The first volley of fire ripped through space, and the galaxy held its breath. The Taker were about to discover that humanity's kindness had been a choice, not a weakness, and now they would pay the price. The battle for Taker space was nothing short of apocalyptic. When Earth's combined fleet, bolstered by Scythari guerrillas and Joran warships, engaged the Taker armada, the galaxy witnessed the full force of humanity's fury. Taker ships, once thought to be the pinnacle of military might, were ripped apart by a combination of human tactics and the ruthless precision of their allies. The Taker had always believed they were the galaxy's rightful rulers, their technology and centuries of dominance making them untouchable. But in the shadow of the Valor and its allies, their hubris would prove to be their undoing. Human forces hit them from all sides, utilizing every trick in the book: EMP pulses, decoy fleets, and unorthodox flanking maneuvers that left the Taker scrambling to respond. Commander Hale's voice echoed through the comms, each command delivered with the same cold clarity that had shattered the Vorcan fleet. Keep the pressure on. No mercy. By the time the dust settled, the Taker's once proud armada lay in ruin. Their flagship, the Crimson Tyrant, was left drifting, crippled and burning, as Taker forces withdrew in a desperate retreat. The message to the galaxy was unmistakable. The Taker's reign was over. The fall of the Taker sent ripples of panic through the remaining galactic powers. The Vorcan Empire, already in disarray, found itself with no allies and no way to protect its crumbling territories. The once feared empire that had dominated galactic trade and politics for centuries was now a shadow of its former self, desperately trying to hold onto what little remained of its power. With the fall of these two titans, an unprecedented shift in the galaxy's balance of power began. The smaller, once oppressed species, now emboldened by the fall of the Taker and the defeat of the Vorcans, began to rise in ways that had been previously unthinkable. The Joran Scythari and Nuvans began forming trade and military alliances with Earth, creating a new power bloc that threatened to eclipse the old empires altogether. Humanity, the so-called Deathworlders, had not just withdrawn, they had reshaped the galaxy's future. And the old order was crumbling under the weight of their ambition. The galaxy, as it had been known for millennia, was dead. A new age had begun. The dust of war settled slowly, but the ramifications of Earth's intervention would echo across the galaxy for centuries to come. The old empires were no more. The Tikar were defeated, their territory scattered, and their once proud fleets reduced to smouldering ruins. The Vorcan Empire, crippled by internal strife and external rebellion, had lost its grip on the galaxy's most lucrative trade routes. Their former colonies, once dominated by fear and obedience, were now free, freer than they had ever been before. And at the center of this new era was Earth. President Jenna Hayes stood before the United Nations once more, her demeanor calm but resolute. The victory over the Tikar and Vorcan empires had transformed her into a symbol of humanity's strength, but it was not just a military victory that she celebrated. It was a new understanding of what humanity could become. Earth was no longer the benevolent protector of the galaxy, but a central power that had carved its own place in the universe. Humanity had shown its strength, its unyielding will to survive, and its refusal to be subjugated any longer. The galaxy is no longer a place where the strong exploit the weak, President Hayes said, her voice echoing across every planet under Earth's influence. It is a new order, one where strength is respected, but justice and freedom will be upheld. Under Earth's leadership, a coalition of former enemies, Sithari, Novans, Joran, and others, came together to form a new political entity, the Free Federation. This was no longer a union of convenience. It was a new vision of the galaxy's future. Where the old empires had only known conquest and subjugation, the Free Federation would embrace a balance of power, one where no single species could dominate the others. Earth would be at the helm, not as a ruler, but as a force of equilibrium. The once unshakable belief in the dominance of the Tikar and Vorcans had been shattered, and with it, the old galactic order. The galaxy had changed, and humanity had changed with it. No longer the passive protector, Earth had taken its place as the unchallenged power in a new turbulent age. The Deathworlders were no longer a myth. The galaxy would learn to respect them.